KD2 TJ field 1.
Hey everybody, I'm just here listening to the hams on the gram net on DMR on 31012. If you don't know what that is, check out hashtag hams on the gram for more. But hold on, we have a really important subject to talk about, and that is the fees the FCC wants to impose on ham radio operators. Let's talk about that. The FCC made big news this week by coming out and publishing their amendment to the 2018 RAY BAUM'S Act. Now, you probably have no idea what the RAY BAUM'S Act is. This was a law enacted by Republicans in Congress in 2018 and signed by President Trump. This act did a lot of things in terms of telecommunications. It dealt with enhanced 911, cybersecurity issues, but most importantly, what's affecting us is Republicans felt that the FCC needed to modernize the way they charge entities that use the spectrum in terms of fees. So one of the things this law does is exempts amateur radio operators from regulatory fees. However, it does include amateur radio for what's known as application fees. Application fees are when we submit paperwork or applications to the FCC for things like a new license, a renewal, or maybe you want a print copy of your certificate. All of these things would now be assessed a fee to amateur radio operators by the FCC in the amount of $50 per application. Now, it's important to note, the law does mandate that the FCC charge every entity that uses spectrum a fee. They cannot exempt anybody as the law is currently written. However, it was up to the FCC how much each entity would pay, and they decided that $50 was the appropriate amount in the proposal for ham radio operators. It does sound a bit steep to me, but hey, I've heard a lot of chatter from the ham radio community this week on social media talking about how this is really not that big of a deal. It amounts to about 1.5 cents per day. But that's really short-sighted. It really is. Let's talk about why it may not be great in the long run for ham radio, starting with somebody that wants to get their ham radio license for the first time. Well, that person today is going to pay about $40 to get their license. How I come up with that number is they're going to pay about $25 for a study material, whether that's software or a book, and they're going to pay $15 likely to a VE testing team. Now, if they were doing it under the new system, that would come out to be about $90 to $95 to get their license. Now, for young people that want to get into this hobby, the difference between $40 and almost $100, that's significant. And even for people that are older, that are on fixed incomes, maybe they're disabled, to a lot of us, it's not a ton of money. But to also a lot of other people, it is a lot of money. And that could potentially stagnate growth in ham radio licenses in the future. But what happens when we move out 10 years? What do those costs look like over time? Because let's talk about what they're actually charging us fees for. When you get your license, that's an application, that's $50 right there. They also want to charge you $50 every time you upgrade your license. So if you want to go to general, to extra, that's $50 every time you want to upgrade. Also, if you want a copy of your license, a print copy, that's $50. If you want to renew your license, which we all have to renew if we're still on the air, it's a requirement every decade, that's also $50 to renew your license. So that new ham radio operator today, without these new fees, is going to be paying right around $60 to $65 in their first 10 years in fees and other costs associated with their license. Now, under that new system from the FCC, it goes up substantially, from 60-something to about $230 to $240 in your first 10 years. Again, that's a decent jump. That's the cost of an HT radio, $200 extra that you wouldn't otherwise be spending. So who's been paying our way for the last how many years, decades, before when fees were abolished? Well, it's pretty simple. The commercial entities were, the TV stations, the big time radio stations, they were charged, and they're charged way more fees, by the way, than we are. It's exorbitant amounts of money in comparison. So those fees were kind of covering our costs as amateur radio operators. And that question that's floating around is, should commercial entities pick up the tab for ham radio in a way? Because we're talking about paying for the cost of the ULS database, also some labor costs, things like that. I say yes. And I know some people are going to disagree, and that's fine. These are profit-generating entities that make a lot of money. They're making less and less in today's environment, but they make a ton of money. Ham radio operators are there, as a public service, as a backup system, and as a hobby. And first and foremost, though, we play an important role if things ever get to be a large-scale disaster. So I think there's a justification there of why commercial entities should continue to help subsidize ham radio. Now remember, under this new Republican law, we have to be charged something, but I just don't think it's probably $50. Maybe something a little less. The next important point we have to talk about is what this means for the FCC and how they view ham radio operators today. By charging a fairly high fee on ham radio for nickel and dime every time we submit an application, does this mean the FCC is starting to view ham radio as more of a pure hobby and less as a public service that should be helped subsidized by for-profit commercial entities? That's something to think about. You know, are they changing the way they view the value that we could bring in a large-scale disaster? I think so. Maybe you don't. Drop me a comment down below and let me know what you think, but I think it's certainly possible. Now, the next one's a fun one. If you want to get out the tinfoil, put it on now. Everybody loves a good conspiracy theory, but maybe you think there's some validity to the fact that the FCC may be trying to stall out ham radio licenses in the next 5 or 10 years because they want to take away our spectrum. We all know that spectrum is at a premium. There are a ton of users and not enough spectrum to go around. I mean, just look at what's happening with 5G. We've lost spectrum recently in the last couple of years. So really, is this high fee that may stagnate licenses for new radio operators, is that a ploy that in the future they could begin to continue stripping away more things? Or will they continue to increase that fee, accelerate that decline in license growth, and then have a justification for saying, we're going to start taking away some of your spectrum because you guys simply just aren't growing anymore as a community? Food for thought. So one of the first things you're hopefully thinking about is, what is the ARRL going to do about this? Well, they did put out a blog post acknowledging that this was happening, but I saw something pretty concerning myself. I posted my blog, which, by the way, if you want to read more in detail about what this means, including the cost breakdowns, you can go to my blog, k0lwc.com, and find the article there and check it out. I posted it up on Facebook, and I had a director of a division for the ARRL comment on my Facebook post and was chastising me for posting this blog and blowing it out of proportion and telling everybody to calm down. I don't know about you. I don't think that's a good thing for the ARRL to be putting out there. I don't want our lobbying arm to be telling people to calm down when the government wants to start making us pay hundreds of dollars over a decade for our license. I just don't. I think it's a bad look for the ARRL, and I'm not surprised that I did not engage in that comment. I didn't say anything to that director, but they voluntarily deleted their comment on Facebook off of my thread, I think because they realized that same point. The ARRL, I don't want to hear calm down right now. I want to hear what you plan on doing for lobbying on behalf of ham radio operators that maybe can't afford to pay these fees, or for the new young kids coming in that are not going to be able to pay the fee as easily. I want to hear what you're going to do for them. That's what I want. I don't want to hear calm down. So I was kind of upset to hear that, but then again, I'm not a member of the ARRL, and here's a great reason why, because I just don't understand how they are effective. I haven't seen them do anything that has impressed me to my first, 12 or 13 years as a ham. So what do you think? Drop me a comment down below. Are you in favor of these fees? Do you think hams should be paying their own way? Or should we be subsidized by other large for-profit transmitters that are on the spectrum? Let me know by dropping a comment. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't, subscribe. I'll catch you again next time.